Hey everybody, welcome to Film Music Media. I'm Kai Savaz. I'm here with composer Greg Nicolett. We're going to dig into some awesome stuff. Greg, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good to see
It's
you.
really nice to see you. Yeah, I think this is the second time we've talked, right? Because we did that panel
Yes, we did a
a
panel.
few
This is
months ago.
our first one-on-one, so this is gonna be awesome.
Yes.
I want to get to know you. I want to get to know your process. I'm a huge fan of your work, and so let's just start from the beginning. I'd love to know if I've been kind of focusing on this question a bit recently as a kickoff point. It can and you can answer it however it means to you. But as a human, as a storyteller, what does as a person, I mean, what does music mean to you?
Interesting. Um, well, I always, I kind of got into this from a pretty like childlike place. I mean, I
Yeah,
loved movies growing up as a kid. I would just feel these waves of goosebumps watching films that really got to me. And these were all like, what you might expect: Star Wars, Star Trek,
yeah.
Tim Burton, Batman, films like that. And so I'd have these really deep emotional responses. And eventually I realized that, if I listened to just the music, then I would have those same emotional responses. And around the same time, I was also playing in youth symphony and discovering composers like a lot of Russians, a lot of composers like Tchaikovsky and
Yeah,
uh, Dvorak isn't Russian, right?
I'm not
Uh,
sure.
not Russian, but Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, these composers who would write these really lush symphonic textures that at the time had a lot in common with a lot of the film music I was listening to, and I just sort of started connecting to music in a very sort of physical, visceral way,
Yeah.
which I guess everybody connects to music in a visceral way, but for me, it was specifically this link to orchestral drama, I guess,
Mm.
for any length of a word, for any lack of a better word. I mean, I was a trombone player, and
Okay.
which meant that I only played during during the peak of all the pieces, right? Like I would
Yeah,
sit
yeah.
there and just wait patiently for the piece to climax, and then I'd finally get to play a couple notes. And so that gave me a chance to really like appreciate and really be cool with just that sense of anticipation and that drama of building something slowly over the course of, like if it's a symphony, over the course of 20, 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. That was sort of my early sort of connection to music was that kind of music. And then as I grew older, I just started getting more interested in all kinds of music, sort of almost like a connoisseur, because we're all
Yeah.
professionals, and especially in film, we're all asked to write in a lot of different styles. So, whenever a new opportunity would present itself, I would just try to throw myself into it and learn what I could about that genre. And sometimes I'd find that it was a good fit. Sometimes I'd find that, well, I really can't. This is really not for me. But either way, I try to find just that in for myself, and that's true for any project too. Just how do I find a way to sort of fall in love with what I'm doing at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. So do you remember, was there like an aha moment in your childhood where you're like, oh, this is what I love? This was there like a movie or a score that did that to you? Or was there something that it's still to this day that you go back and you can just watch it and cry or something like that?
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. The stuff that gave me goosebumps as a kid still does as an adult, but
I
it's
know.
a little harder to find those feelings in new stuff as it used to be. I'm sure that's pretty common.
I agree. Yeah.
But uh, but yeah, for me it was definitely Batman, the Elfman '89 Batman, and then also Horner, James Horner, Star Trek
Mm.
2. I'd say were the big scores that really that I just listened over and over and over again to, and couldn't stop listening to all the textures in and picking apart in my head. And then Tchaikovsky 5 was the other big sort of symphonic, I guess, connection for me.
Yeah,
But again, this
absolutely.
is early stuff. I mean, I've grown beyond my obsession with just the orchestra.
Right.
Although interestingly, my career sort of ended up putting me back there with my work at Disney and then Potionomics, which we'll talk a little bit about.
Absolutely. So before we get into jumping into kind of some of your current project, talk to me about like, because I mean, you have kind of worn so many hats in your career. I mean, you've worked as an additional composer, you've worked as an orchestrator, you've done sound editing and mixing and all that stuff. And I'm curious, in those early jobs and those early kind of things, what were the big lessons that you learned that kind of helped shape, I guess, maybe what your workflow is as a composer today?
Yeah, I also spent time as a video editor. I actually quit music for a
Oh, that's
couple
right.
years. Was
Yeah.
just
Wow.
editing, which was an interesting, also taught me a lot. But yeah, as far as sort of the music related jobs, to be totally honest, I had a hard time when I first moved out here. I was not, um, I did not really, for one thing, I had a pretty big chip on my shoulder, to be honest. Maybe that's a good quality, I think, in some cases, and we all need a bit of an ego. But when you're younger, it can kind of get in the way.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah.
I didn't know all the things I didn't know yet, to be
Mm,
honest, and so and then I also had this sort of this tremendous lack of patience. I didn't really appreciate the fact that it like people would use this phrase constantly that it would take 10 years before you find success, right? And I
yeah,
didn't I would hear that and be like, ah, whatever, I mean, I'm 2 or 3 years and I'll be fine. And because that was really the only the longest period of time I could really conceive of. I mean, if you think about it, we go to high school, we go to college, everything's in 4 year chunks, right? We don't
yeah,
really know what a 10-year time span feels like. And yet looking back, that's exactly how long it took for me to really launch any sort of, like sort of stable career. And I think so. A lot of those early jobs, I was not necessarily, I was learning a lot, but I wasn't really thinking them long term the way I should. I wasn't considering the fact that, well, I could be an orchestrator for 3 years, and that's only 30% of my 10-year horizon, right? I mean, and so I
yeah.
would sort of move from job to job and look for the next thing without maybe necessarily staying longer than I maybe I should have in retrospect. Um, in terms of specific skills, well, I mean, as an assistant, I would do a lot of additional music, and that was all oftentimes aping styles of other composers, and so
Mm,
and that's sort of a consistent, like I think, bit of great training, because whether
yeah,
you're aping the style of a composer you're working for, or whether you're following a temp score, learning how to to do something that's not necessarily your instinct is sort of an important skill, I think, for a composer. You want to have your own voice, but you still need to know how to inhabit the shoes of the director's vision, right? Or the composer's vision in that case. So
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And then finally, just on the video editing front, I really feel like I would recommend all composers do a little video editing, because I think of all the other aspects of filmmaking, that is probably the one that's most similar to what we do, just because we interact with it so directly as composers. I mean, we can change the feel of the pacing of a scene just by the tempo that we choose, as can the video editor, but we both, there's an interplay there, right? And so to
Yeah,
sort of to be on the video editor side of it, and to just play with tempo from that perspective really taught me a lot on the music side, and how to play with time.
absolutely. No, I mean that make. I mean, you look at John Ottman, who's I think a prime example of that. Winning an Oscar for editing, but also
Oh
being one of the
yeah.
most premier composers. And I've talked to him at length about the different hats his brain works in that. But I mean, I think just in general, I think a lot of composers who maybe just, if you're looking to get in this profession, you need to just jump into storytelling. It's about the screen, visual storytelling and every aspect of it. And I love how you point out that maybe yeah, you weren't ready to accept the 10-year challenge, because I remember when I first moved out, and yeah, I was about 11 years in LA before I'm temporarily outside, but I'm coming back to LA. And it is right that in that 10-year mark where you start feeling your groove and you start feeling like you finally are getting someplace. And but I remember I used to hammer myself. I'm like, listen, I know I told myself, because you're going to see all your friends jump in other careers, be like boom, 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 and they start rising up.
Sure.
They're buying their houses, they're getting their
Right. Oh my
cars, and
gosh.
you're just sitting
Yeah.
there going, crap, I can barely afford groceries still.
Right.
So I think that
Right.
was a big part of being a young person out there in LA, just like, fuck, I just want to
It is, but
fast
imagine if
forward
we
it.
yeah, imagine if we really, like, if we had the ability at that age to really think about that period of time, and really laid out exactly what we wanted to accomplish from a
Yeah,
like what we wanted to learn. Like maybe you could be an assistant for 5 years, and that's fine, right? You could assist.
yeah,
Think
yeah,
about the composer you want to devote that much time to. Maybe you want to be in a touring rock band for a while and gain some experience doing that. I mean, that again, spend a couple years with that. I mean, if you really can put yourself in that position, it's just so hard, I think, when you're that age to think
I
along
had
those
it
lines.
too. Yeah, it's also, it's hard to predict what will happen, because
Sure.
I went to film school and I graduated, moved out there. Oh yeah, I'm going to work in film, and I'm 10 years later I'm in animation. Never thought that was going to happen. So, but it's like,
Yeah, same here. I didn't expect it to be an animation either. We should
yeah,
talk more about that sometime, maybe offline. I'd love
yeah.
to hear. more about your story, um,
Absolutely.
but yeah,
So
I did not aim to become an animation composer. That's definitely another life lesson from this whole uh, Hollywood journey, is that the thing that you're aiming for is not necessarily where the opportunities come from. Just,
yeah.
you know.
So, but let's I mean that's a perfect segue. Let's jump into animation. Let's talk about T.O.T.S, which is Tiny One's transport service, which you composed for Disney and Disney Junior. So, I mean, I work at Cartoon Network Studios. This is the preschool market is something that we haven't been in, but we are stepping into a little bit.
Oh,
And
interesting.
I'm curious as a, you know, I always grew up, when you grow up, and that's such a formative, part of childhood. And I know that we've worked with, you look at child psychologists, and you're trying to, because it is about learning and development and stuff. So I'm curious, as a composer, as a storyteller as well, talk to me about, first of all, I guess, working on this, getting the show. What was, because you've been working on it for some time now, so I'm curious from the start, how has the show kind of started, and how has it evolved, and what is your approach to the music of Tots?
Sure. Um, I guess we'll start at the beginning with just how I got the show.
Yeah,
That'll sort of play into our early career conversation too. It was actually the second show that I've worked on with the same team there. The
that's
first
right.
show
You
that I
did
worked on,
Goldie and the Bear, was right.
right, Goldie
Yeah.
and Bear, which was sort of a fairy tale forest kind of thing. And I got introduced to Disney through my friend Rob Cantor, who I went to school with. Didn't know very well then, but got to know better when he moved out here. And we collaborated on this sort of crazy viral video back in the day called Actual Cannibal Shia LaBeouf. I think it's actually called Shia LaBeouf Live on Facebook
Yes.
if you want to look it up. But so he makes this crazy video, and he's like, "Hey, I need you to help me make it epic with the music, because he's a songwriter mostly, and I can bring the full boys choir, I can bring the string quartet, I can bring the piano and harp parts." So I did that. I brought that to it, and that did so well that he was able to leverage a couple contacts he had at Disney, and eventually got a chance to audition on Goldie and Bear as a songwriter. When that happened, that was an opportunity for me to, he had the opportunity to introduce me to some of the creatives there. So that's what opened that door for me. Again, you never sort of expect, but working on a
Exactly.
viral video, it sort of leads you to working at Disney, right? It's not a
Right.
direct path, right? It's just what comes your way that you succeed at might lead you to something you didn't expect. And so yeah, so we did Goldie. We did Tots. That actually wrapped up. We're on a third show together called Pupstruction, which comes out next year.
Oh
And
wow.
you wanted to know a bit more about what else did you say? Like just
Well, talk to me about, I guess, writing music for a preschool
yeah,
show, which is also different than regulars. I guess they always, the way they, at least we do a demographic, like ages 6 to 12, and then anything
yeah,
before that is like preschool. So I'm curious, as a composer. Also, I'll throw in this too, because you're a new dad as well. I remember we had to push because you're on dad duty. So I'm curious, how's your perspective changed, especially with your upcoming project, as a dad now, and you have
sure.
someone who will be watching this in a few months, a few years time.
Yeah, well, I don't think there are any rules like anything else, but I can sort of speak to the way that our team looks at it. And I
Yeah.
know that for us on TOTS and now Obstruction, uh, the main lens that we look through when giving notes on the music is whether the kids will pretty much understand the story,
Mm,
right? It's a very different lens than you use writing for adults, because for adults you're assuming for the most part that the narrative is straightforward, that they know what's going on, that they don't need the music to really assist anything. And there you want the music to add, you want the music to chiefly add material that isn't there. You want it to bring a fourth dimension to what you're watching, right? Ideally, at least that's how I look at it.
yeah, yeah.
With preschool content, you really do need to help kids, I think, sometimes, especially younger ones, understand what, for example, what humor is, what sarcasm is, what so I know early on when I was first working on Goldie, a producer on my first pass would look at me and say, like, you didn't hit any of the jokes in this scene. And I'd be sort of confounded, like, what do you mean by hit the jokes? And they
Yeah.
meant literally, like my instinct was stay away from the humor, right? Let the jokes kind of play on their own, don't need to. But for this, again, for this audience, actually having the music literally hit the joke with sort of a goofy clarinet, or
Mm,
or a xylophone was sort of what they wanted, just so again the characters could, the audience could tell the difference between sarcasm, humor, and just like plot information, right? And speaking of plot information, that's one of the few points where we don't use music, right? Because we want to make sure that the narrative is very clear.
Yeah,
Otherwise, it's almost wall to wall, because again, music is often serving that sort of assistive function, in outlining the narrative. So I guess that's how we look at it. I don't think every kids show needs to be treated that way, but for this specific kind of storytelling, that works well. I mean, I'm really into alternative like ways of doing that. Like there's a show on Netflix called City of Ghosts that I think is very much
Elizabeth
geared
Ito, one
towards
of
younger
our
kids.
past. She used to work at Cartoon Network Studios.
Oh, it's one of your. Oh,
Yeah,
oh yeah, one of your
she
alumni.
so
Yeah.
yeah, she used to work here, and that she pitched a show that the network didn't did passed on, and then she went to Netflix to create City of Ghosts, and she just I think won some Emmys. I mean, she's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it's a show that's, it's I think it can certainly work for younger kids,
Yeah.
and it's scored in a totally different way. Michael Andrews is doing it. He's treating it in a very sort of like, he writes a lot of ambient synth scores, and
Hmm.
he's bringing that same sensibility to this. So I don't want to say that anything I just said is a rule, but that's certainly how we do it on Disney for the kind of sort of crazy zany stories that we tell there.
Absolutely. And for something, is there what would you say would be like the biggest challenge for you as a composer working on maybe a preschool show?
It's really hard for me to, or at least it was really hard for me to inhabit that, make that shift, because everything I'd done till then was live action for adults.
Yeah.
So I really did have to go to school again in a sense, and really take the notes to heart, like hitting the jokes, making sure that I score different sections of the show that have the right emotional content, such as the moral of the story always needs to be outlined with music that feels more emotive, right? Like the way, basically it was just a reminder that I cannot hit the audience over the head too hard with almost
Mm.
anything. I can be as big as I want. I can be as what was the word I was using? Sort of, I don't know, instructive or assistive as I want in terms of outlining the
Yeah.
narrative, which again went against a lot of my instincts as a composer for live action material. But once I got used to it, I feel like I sort of understand where we're going. The hardest thing for me is honestly just interfacing with, well, Rob, as a songwriter, the songs are absolutely the focus of all of these shows, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's what the kids remember. That's what the producers are sort of giving most of their energy into. And so the score has to interface with the songs from a palette perspective, from a thematic perspective sometimes. Trying to figure out when a song theme will work as a score theme, and when maybe that song theme is really not going to work as a score theme, because maybe that song is a certain genre that makes
Hmm.
a lot of sense as a song, but simply from a melodic standpoint doesn't really capture the action. And so there's a lot of discussions about that, and those are a lot of decisions I have to kind of just make on the fly, since there isn't really time to always sort of
Yeah.
have long conversations about stuff like that.
So when do you come into the production process? Are you coming in, since music is such an integral part of the structure, I think, of each episode? Are you coming in? Are you start working on animatics? Are you waiting for a lock picture? And I guess are the songs part of the script writing? And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Rob actually gets to write the songs during the breaking of the screenplay, so he's right
Oh
there at the
wow.
beginning. Um, and then they animate to the songs, of course.
Yeah.
For score, as anybody watching this who's a composer would know, that we're generally scoring to picture. One of the amazing things about animation, or is that the picture rarely changes, which is very different than live action, where the picture is
Yeah.
almost constantly changing. It's at least, maybe this is different in feature animation, but at least in TV animation, it's so expensive to make any changes, to make
Hmm.
major changes to the animation, that things are pretty much locked to the storyboards. Um, you might have a couple frames here and there, or a scene trimmed there, but you're never going to have a situation in live action where they're suddenly like, you know what, we're going to tell the whole episode in reverse, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's something that they'll do in the last minute, like we're going to really shuffle things up 3 days
Right.
before release, and they have to rescore the whole thing. That never happens. So I could pretty much score to the animatics and be like 90% there, if I
Yeah.
had to. But what usually happens is we get brought on during animatic phase. We score to those for a while, and then animation uh, gets further along, and then we sort of get in sync they're called them composites or color passes, and we sort of
Mhm.
end up with pretty close to final animation at that point.
And are these 11 minutes or 22?
They're two 11 minutes
Two
per
11s per
22
episode.
minute episode. So we
Okay,
do
cool.
every 2 weeks we do a 22.
Nice.
So
So let's in a maybe kind of a similar world, let's jump over to video games because you also have this amazing project Potionomics that came out, an indie game that has, I mean, if you look at Steam and look at the reviews, I mean, it's just everyone loves it. Everyone is just, I mean, loving this game. So talk to me about this project and I guess how you got involved and I guess what were the initial discussions about music for this game?
yeah, I'm so glad it's doing well.
Yeah, it's doing really
We
well.
gosh, I got brought on back in like 2016, and so it's
Yeah,
just been
wow.
a
It
long
just shows,
slog.
yeah, how long it takes to make something
Yeah,
like that.
I don't think anybody expected it to take quite this long, but I mean, I'm just glad it got finished and it's doing well because I've been on indie games, a couple of different ones, for example, in the past few years that just kind of fizzle out. They lose funding, and so
Yeah,
really
it's
got to
tough.
give props to the developers for sticking through it. Um, yeah, sorry. What was your other
So talk,
question?
yeah, so talk to me about yeah, working on this game. What were the, I guess, what were the initial conversations about music?
Okay.
How was music going to be part of this game, and what did
Yeah,
you eventual approach was it? I guess what was your
sure.
eventual approach? Yeah,
Yeah, so like I said, I was brought on really early. Jadi, the lead developer, really loves music. He just really values it, and which I was really excited to hear. I mean, he from the beginning wanted to be writing themes even before the gameplay loop was fully conceived. And so we had a main title, we had character themes going. Um, Back when he was still pitching. In fact, we actually recorded a couple themes for the game with live orchestra because he wanted that as part of his pitch deck basically to get more money. So he from the beginning he was thinking about music as an asset,
yeah,
and that's amazing for me as a composer because um, I mean I don't know, as you may know, but music can be either really a huge part of a project or it can be sometimes considered almost like an afterthought where you sort of cram it in all at the end. And um,
yeah,
so being involved in the beginning was really cool because it got me opportunities to be on a fly on the wall as characters were developed. It's a very character focused game, right? And so we have a lot of unique character themes. And the other thing about this particular project is that all these characters, because of the nature of the sort of the trope of the game, are almost feeling like they're from different genres, like they're walking in from different types of video games, and so the music is jumping around a lot. And what's cool about being there in the development of the character is that you start to get information on their backstory that doesn't necessarily make it into the game, but can still inform the kind of music you're writing. One of the characters in the game, Helene, she's sort of the antagonist, but she's not really the antagonist. She's sort of just there's probably a narrative term for this, but she's the reason why you're in the like she's the impetus for you
she's
playing
like
the game.
the catalyst of the
Catalyst,
whole.
yeah,
Yeah,
and she's also there's a threat sort of underneath that catalyst. And the original conception of the character was she was literally going to she was sort of like a devil type figure who would
mm,
who would you basically had sold your soul to, and she would drag you off to the depths of hell or whatever to serve. But that got way pared back in terms of darkness. But I already had this theme written along those lines. It was very choral. It was in this sort of made up language and very slow moving. And so I thought, this isn't going to work anymore. But we decided ultimately, like, what, let's just keep it because it brings that level of depth to the character, a level of depth to the character and mystery that even though it's not necessarily in the writing right now, it still adds something, that
yeah.
isn't there. And so that was, I think, true for a lot of the different characters where I was given more material to work with than I necessarily needed. you know,
And so how much total music did you write for the game?
about 2.5, 3 hours, I would
Oh
say.
wow.
Yeah, it's a long, it's about a 20-hour experience, I think. And so, like any game, you're thinking a lot about how long is a character going to be in this specific place.
Right.
How long, like, is this melody going to get annoying if it plays over and over again? It's a very melody-driven game, so I was very worried that
Yeah.
these strong melodies would maybe you like it in the first time, but would you like it the 15th time? And so we would do on occasion do things like have the melody trigger um, on a probability, like only 50% of the time will the melody come in for this particular track, things like that. But at the end of the day, you are sort of just guessing.
Yeah.
I did one of the things that was great about working on an indie title is that I get to do all my own implementation, which is
Oh
not the case
wow.
for most AAA games.
Yeah, mostly they just hand over stems and it's like the audio director kind of decides
Right.
the placement and
Yeah.
implementation, right? Yeah.
I was sort of like an audio director in a way, although I wasn't heading up the sound. But in terms of, I had some input into the sound, but I was able to, yeah, totally implement the music myself. It's
Wow.
yeah, it's great.
That's awesome. So I mean that must have
I
been
wish I
so
could do it.
rewarding.
Rewarding and it's instructive. I learned a lot. Hopefully, so if I do a project on a with a bigger team, I will know more
Yeah.
about what not to do since I was able to be in the nitty gritty of it.
Was there a favorite section of the game, whether it was an area or a character theme that really kind of spoke to you, that was kind of your personal favorite? I'm not sure everything was your
Yeah,
little baby, but if it's one thing that was maybe a little personal or that you really loved to work on.
personal. I don't know if anything's really, let's say personal.
Well, I guess that was a
You
wrong
know,
term.
so yeah, there are pieces that I would write. Like there's a piece called Rafta in Moonlight, which is just a very nice, almost impressionistic Eric Satie
Yeah.
type of piece that I wrote late at night. Um, you know, my wife was working in the room next to me, and she was, you know, really loving to hear it, and I was really loving to play it, and it came out really quickly, and and you know, it was one of those pieces where I'm like, you know what, this is I like this piece too much. It's probably going to get cut, is what, which is a reaction I often have when I fall in love with a piece of music too much. But
Yeah.
fortunately, Jody liked it. We kept it in the game, and then a second one would be this boss Finn track, which is a boss battle track in the game. It's just the most it was just the most technically complicated piece I've written in perhaps ever, and also the
Oh
biggest
wow.
because we had a big band and sax section and drum solos and orchestra, and it was the hardest to record. It was really hard to get done. We did it first thing in the morning too, which I would not recommend, except for the fact that the jazz players had to be out as soon as possible to get to their gigs. So we had to do it first. But yeah, it all came together.
That's amazing. So, uh, I want to pull back out again and maybe just talk generally about your approach. We talked, you know, we have kind of two of your most recent projects as kind of examples, but and I know this question will differ depending on whatever project you're working on. But I'm curious where the first note comes from you. Where do you like to start your process? Do you just like to sit in your room and you know, you mentioned how you're writing and your wife was working next to you? Do you like to be isolated? Do you like to be with people? Do you like to tinker on the piano? Do you like to go for a walk? Where does kind of the genesis, like the start of your process usually?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I knew the answer to that definitively, I would just do it every time. I don't think I
Yeah,
say. It also depends on the medium, right? Because with video games,
yeah,
a
sure.
lot of it is discussion about the narrative and looking at character art and thinking about again the logistics of
All
location.
right, well, then maybe let's use Potionomics as an example. What was your
Sure.
start? Like, what was your starting point there? Did you look at art first? Did you just have a conversation first? What was the triggering, I guess, part?
Um, so again, I was so involved in the character discussion that like I said, I had so much material to work with. Sylvia,
Yeah,
the main character, there was initially a discussion that she was an orphan, and so the theme that I wrote for her was very melancholy, very um, sort of, you know, beautiful but poignant and sad. Again, narrative kind of got changed, but we kept it,
yeah.
fortunately. And it I don't know, you know, being able to put myself in the shoes of a character's past definitely helps in terms of finding a melody and a harmony. Though Potionomics was a little bit unique in that way because it was more thematic and much more harmonic, I would say, than most of the film work that I do, which usually for me starts at the starting point for most of the film work I do is palette, actually, because for me, if I don't know, you know, if I think I'm working with the orchestra, I'm going to write certain kinds of music. But if I think I'm using,
Mm.
you know, analog synthesizers, or if I'm doing the whole thing on a solo cello, it's gonna very much change the melodies and the timbres that I'm using. So I need to know in advance what that palette is,
Yeah.
and finding that palette is usually the first bit of exploration that I'm doing.
Does it usually take you a while to find that? Is it a long process for you, or is it something that usually kind of just you figure it out pretty quick?
It's the hardest part.
Yeah.
The hardest part, because that is usually what people, I would say people respond to palette and color first when they hear a
Mhm.
score. That's the first, they don't process melody or harmony or or recurring themes, the first thing they process is palette, which is really sort of another word for genre,
Yeah.
you know, in a way. And so even though you can sort of I guess some projects are it's obvious what genre it is if it's horror, if it's animation. Again, if you know you're going to be using orchestra, it helps a lot. Um, but if you don't know that, or if you can't use orchestra because you don't have the money for it, um, then yeah, you're trying to find. I mean, I'm looking at all kinds of things. I'm looking at if I have it, I'm looking at the color palette of the film. You know, maybe if the color correction is such that they're putting a blue tint over everything, that's actually for me at least going to
Yeah.
change the color of the instruments that I'm choosing. Maybe I'll use more, sine waves and pianos and more reverbs on a blue versus a red, where I'll be using more distortion or metal sounds, things like that. Like I know I'll go different directions based on elements like that. So I'm just gathering all the material I can, reading the script, looking at dailies, looking at actors' performances, trying to see. Oh, and then one other thing that I like doing is seeing if the environment of the film itself lends itself to any sort of musical
Mm.
concepts. Like I did a short film called Atoms a few years back, where the lead character, played by Patton Oswalt, is rummaging through his neighbor's basement, trying to remove all of the potentially hazardous items from the basement. And he's just taking normal things like paint cans and saws and hammers, and because he's a little paranoid. And I thought, I have all those items around, maybe, and they all make sound, right? So maybe that can be my drum set,
Yeah.
right? And so that became an in for that project. As like, well, here's this foundation of original, interesting sounds that I can build on.
Absolutely. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that might be the most challenging or hardest part. I'm curious for you, what is the most rewarding aspect of the whole journey from start to finish of a project? Is there a part of that journey that is like the most creatively rewarding for you?
Honestly, it's the end. Like
When you
it's
can
so
when you
hard.
can sit back and just look at
Yeah,
everything. Yeah.
I think an author said, I forget who said this, I should look it up. Somebody said once, I hate writing but love having written. I wouldn't say that
Yes.
I hate writing, but the feeling of having finished it, mixed it, felt it all finally come together, is the best. Because honestly, while you're in the midst of it, you don't know if what you're writing is going to work. I've tried to get more okay with that level, that kind of insecurity as I've gotten older, especially on Potionomics, for example, where I had to write a lot of music without picture.
Mm.
It was. I hadn't done that a lot, in a while, since my college days, really, and meaning not having a strict sort of frame to work within. I had to create the frame myself, and I would just try to get more comfortable with writing a lot of material, not knowing where it would fit in, putting it aside, working on another section of the piece, and then realizing, oh, this will fit really well right here, and just being okay with that working without a net kind of feeling. And that's true whether you're coming up with different sounds or coming up with your theme. You have to be willing to step away from whatever you're doing, in the sense of not be so worried that it's going to fit. And that's especially true, I think, in film, because since you are constrained so much from the picture, you really do need to separate yourself from it. Because if you want to write a theme that you're gonna derive material from, you're not going to have the window to do that within the 30-second scene you may have that needs that theme, right? So you need to have that theme written in its full form, in a way, to know how to extract from it into that particular scene. You can't just start with the scene. So that's something I'm trying to get better at, just writing away from picture.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
You mentioned kind of overcoming self-doubt and then kind of becoming more confident. I'm curious, when you present, music is such a, I mean, you can look at it as being vulnerable and kind of opening up and putting a part of you out there. Do you get nervous when you submit something for like a review, or you're presenting it to your director for the first time, or is that a nervous thing for you now? Or are you just ready to get the feedback and just keep working?
You know, um, it's not that nerve-wracking. I usually feel pretty good about what I'm sending most of the time.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's more nerve-wracking when it's Disney, or when it's a new client who I don't know
Mm.
very well, or uh, but the stakes are so different on so many different projects. If a lot of the time that I spend writing new material is for these pitches for projects that my manager is putting me up for, and
Yeah.
those have a certain anonymity to them, in the sense that I haven't usually met the show creators. I don't really feel much of anything when I send those off. I usually just either feel great that I nailed it, or kind of frustrated that I didn't come up with something that I liked in the
Yeah.
in a small amount of time. And honestly, my perception of the music tends to have very little to do with the success of it. I land projects where I'm not necessarily thinking I nailed it, and don't hear back on ones where I'm like, this is my best work. So I don't
Right.
even know if that feeling is that useful, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, the best feeling is when you're working with somebody who you've worked with before and who you know isn't gonna judge you too harshly on that first pass. Because
Yeah.
honestly, to be honest, I don't think we're really supposed to nail it on the first pass. I think what we're supposed to do is follow our instincts and do something that is maybe 50% there, and then that gives us a jumping off point to really get into the conversation, because you can only talk about so much, you can only talk about music so much before you've written a note. You really have to write that first note to really get into it, I think, with somebody. And so if you have somebody that's cool with that, that's the best dynamic you can hope
Absolutely.
for.
So talk to me about what do you, as a composer, what are the best attributes and I guess characteristics that a director or a producer could have to work with? Like if you could build your own, the best filmmaker that you could
Double my
work with.
director.
Yeah, like if you could pick and choose like the top like maybe top three top three characteristic that a director should have that makes your life easier as a composer, or not easier, but just more rewarding, and I guess the collaborative experience just more rewarding for both sides and to help the story. I'm curious because I'm sure you've dealt with some crazy personalities and some batshit crazy people in your day that maybe are maybe more toxic or negative. And I'm curious,
Yeah, we're
yeah,
all we're all crazy and toxic, I think,
oh
at
yeah, yeah.
times. It just depends on the context. Um, yeah, one thing would be just if the film is edited well. I mean,
Mm,
editing again, maybe it's because I was an editor, but editing that is either too tight, where it's cutting scenes off too closely for music to sort of have a moment, or editing that's maybe the opposite, where it's just too many pregnant pauses.
mm,
Just a good edit, one that fits the spirit of the material and is conducive to scoring, is important. And that's sort of hard. I mean, I don't know how you sort of
yeah,
get that. That's also a matter of taste too. Maybe my taste is just different than
yeah.
other directors, but that's a big help. Secondly, that ability to talk about color and tone and emotion is really helpful. I don't necessarily, and a lot of composers say this, don't necessarily think it's helpful when directors talk musically.
Hmm.
It doesn't really help all that much, just because I even as a composer working 24/7, I feel like my musical knowledge is still barely scratching the surface of what's out there. And so
Right.
I don't find it that useful. I feel like the musical exploration happens, I'm doing that. What I want to know is the root of the motivation behind the musical exploration I'm about to do. So are we, talking about character motivation, talking about perspective of the music, talking about the way the music's just being used globally. Are you a director that wants to, like, do you want me to hit the emotional beats of a scene, or do you want the music to function more like a LUT, or almost like an Instagram filter, where it's floating above everything and not really tied to the edit and just sort of
Mm,
providing a
yeah,
vibe? If the director knows that and can speak in those terms, it'll really help me sort of hone in on what they're looking for. And a lot of times that comes through with just watching examples of different projects, to be honest. I've never really met a director that can kind of break it down along those lines. I break it down for me because that helps me ask the kind of questions I need to get to know them. So
absolutely.
I don't know. I
Oh,
don't know what a perfect director would be. I guess it would be a mirror of myself, who I, which is, I'm just a total egotist. But that's a good
well,
question, Kaya. That's a good question. I have to
yeah.
think about that more.
I mean, I guess Chiquino figured it out because he just started directing himself, and now he's
Oh
composing.
yeah. Has he released anything yet, or is that still in progress?
No, he did the new the Marvel show, the Marvel special presentation, the Werewolf by Night.
Oh, okay.
He directed and scored that one, so that was
Oh,
his
I didn't
first.
know that. Okay, I'll have to check that out. Okay,
Very,
cool.
yeah, it's great. It's a little 1 hour kind of throwback to old horror. It's not connected to the universe or anything. It's on Disney Plus. Yeah, definitely
Very
worth
cool.
checking. Yeah. So to I guess to kind of wrap things up a bit, we're going through like the most massive changes that we've seen, I guess, in the entertainment industry. I mean, at least in our lifetime. I mean, we were
Mm.
both experienced. I mean, the studios are shifting, everything is shifting. So I'm curious, as a composer, as maybe a younger composer too, not one of the veterans sitting at the top, have already accomplished some, like their big careers are all kind of behind them. I'm curious, as a composer still really kind of working in the industry, what are the biggest challenges that you see for composers facing today that are working kind of in the weeds of everything right now?
I feel like our experiences are all very different.
Mm,
Biggest challenges for composers, I guess. I mean, there's always, fees are always going to be a challenge.
yeah,
With the shift from royalties coming in from for royalties being sort of a dependable source of income on broadcast to the streaming platform, where basically the pie has gotten so much bigger with the amount of content that's available at one time,
yeah,
the royalties that we can expect to get are, it's just inevitable that they're going to be smaller because the pie is just so much bigger. That's a good and a bad thing, right? Because now more composers are technically getting paid, but if you're a young composer making your way up, you're not going to get paid the same amount in royalties that your senior composers who worked only in broadcast paid, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah,
you're at a disadvantage to them. Meanwhile, they are still getting royalties from the streaming sites from shows that probably would maybe not have been in syndication. So it's sort of a double-edged sword, I think, for younger composers coming up. Um, but as Richard Kraft or something would say, like fee structure and money has always been a concern, and so no matter what
yeah,
era you're in, you're still going to be sort of thinking along those lines. Otherwise, I think there's a lot of opportunities now. I don't. I wouldn't say I think for the most part, it's probably better than it's been for most composers.
yeah,
For one thing, studios are more incentivized now to look for underrepresented and just different voices. I mean, I think there was a bit of a period of time where a lot of the work was consolidating more and more and more, and you saw individual composers just getting more and more shows and their teams just getting bigger and bigger, because if the studios aren't incentivized to take risks, then they'll just stick with what works.
sure,
But since they've been incentivized to find more diverse talent, they have to look in places where they haven't looked before. And I think that's opened the doors for a lot of people, no matter what your background is. Yeah, and there's just so much more content being made than there ever has been.
yeah,
It is so possible to it is very possible now to hook up with somebody who can make a short film or a feature film that stands toe to toe with some of the best stuff being made for Netflix or even features, just because the tools to make those projects are so much more readily accessible. They're still not super common, but you can find yourself attached to projects like that.
yeah.
Go on YouTube and find just beautifully animated. Uh, I saw a couple of Star Trek parodies recently that were they were um, they were drawn in the style of the original series animated show for the
Oh
Next
wow,
Gen and Voyager crews, right?
yeah,
And it's like, and they're perfect. I mean, you hook up with a director like that or whatever, and score their next indie short, and it could lead you to a series, right? And that's those things are all over the place if you just spend a little time looking for them.
absolutely. I think technology has made everything more accessible, and it can connect people too. I mean, we can connect with other people who are kind of in the same stage of our careers, and we can collaborate and work, and that is exciting because I love just working with other people and hearing ideas, and it's why we kind of got into this. Yeah,
We are more isolated than ever, though. Yeah, I mean, I think Zoom and the pandemic have actually have isolated other folks in a way that we're probably pretty used to as composers, since we do a lot of work
yeah,
on our own. But I don't think that level of isolation at all times is always a good thing. I still think, having a musician in the studio, for example, rather than just working remotely with them, you're gonna get different results if you can direct them in person. That said,
absolutely.
I've rarely had somebody in the studio. I almost do everything remotely now, so I'm learning how to work under that paradigm, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, things change. It's all about adapting and moving forward. So, but moving forward, is there? I mean, you mentioned that you're working on new shows. Or anything else that you can mention that you're working that we can look forward to?
Unfortunately, I probably can't mention anything on this platform. There's a couple development projects that I've just gotten attached to, which may or may not turn into series. I'm
Sure.
really
Yeah.
excited about one of them. I mean, I'm excited about both of them, but one of them in particular is really fun. It's sort of an Avatar meets. I can say that it's sort of like Avatar, the Last Airbender meets Land Before Time.
Oh, nice. That's
If I
one of
could
my
pitch it,
favorite
which is
animated
like, I know, yeah,
movies.
I'm really excited about it. And then Obstruction, of course, comes next year. And then hopefully, I mean, I'm excited to see what the next game for Voracious is.
Yeah,
They
Voracious getting
haven't,
started. I mean,
yeah,
they had a nice bright future ahead, I think, after the success of Potionomics. So I can't wait.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've just released on PC right now, and if it hasn't been announced yet, but if we end up on consoles, I think that'll be
That'd be
a
huge.
place
Yeah,
to shine. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Greg, thank you so much for sitting down tonight and taking us into your world and talking about your process. It's such an honor and such so much fun. So yeah, thank you so much for all your insight.
Oh, thank you, Kai. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, especially since I mean, you have some pretty big stars on your channel. So thanks for including me.